The final move a narcissist makes only comes to light when they truly understand that they no longer hold any claim over your mind. When a narcissist realizes that you have stopped being a person they can easily control, a shift happens within them. They do not feel proud of the progress you are making. They do not offer respect for your personal growth. Instead, they feel a deep sense of threat. The moment they witness you becoming stronger, more aware, and more independent, they start to sense that their influence over you is slipping away forever. What many people fail to realize is that this specific moment of realization often triggers one last desperate attempt to regain the power they once held. Stick with me here because what comes next is a trap almost everyone falls for at least once. There is something deeply unsettling about this behavior that most people do not fully grasp until they are experiencing it firsthand. When narcissists come to understand that their usual methods are no longer working, they almost never choose to walk away quietly. Instead, they prepare one final maneuver. It is crafted with great care to shake you emotionally, cloud your judgment, and pull you back into the exact circular dynamic they once commanded. This final play has the potential to unravel months or even years of your hard-earned healing in a single afternoon. If you are not prepared for it, and if you do not know how to identify what is happening, you might walk straight into their trap without even realizing it. That is precisely why understanding this behavioral pattern is so crucial for your peace of mind. Before this final move even appears, there is usually an underlying period of quiet psychological tension. On the surface, everything might seem perfectly calm. The narcissist may appear to be distant, quiet, or even completely indifferent to what is going on around them. But beneath that silence, something very different is actually unfolding. The greatest fear that a narcissist harbors is not rejection, and it is not abandonment. Their deepest, most core fear is watching a person they once controlled become mentally and emotionally stronger than they are. This specific moment threatens the false image of themselves that they have spent years constructing. Narcissists depend on a carefully maintained illusion of superiority. They need to believe that they are more powerful, more important, and more significant than anyone around them. That belief serves as the very foundation of their entire identity. The problem is that this identity is incredibly fragile and easily shattered. Narcissists cannot easily look at their own weaknesses. They actively avoid any form of self-reflection because looking inward would force them to face painful truths they are not prepared to handle. Instead, they push those weaknesses onto other people. They criticize, they accuse, they blame, and they project. All of these actions allow them to avoid the difficult task of examining themselves. You need to remember this key detail for what is coming next. When you begin the process of healing, something very important begins to shift. Healing does not always look like a dramatic event. It is often a very quiet internal process. You start to trust your own judgment again. You stop constantly looking for approval from others. You stop feeling the need to explain every single decision you make to someone else. You learn how to set boundaries without being weighed down by guilt. You learn how to say no without being gripped by fear. Most importantly, you stop reacting to them the way you once did. To you, this feels like genuine growth. To the narcissist, it feels like losing total control. What you see as positive progress, they interpret as a direct threat. What you experience as newfound freedom, they experience as a personal loss of power. The balance that once tipped in their favor suddenly begins to shift, and they notice this change even if they cannot fully explain it. They can feel the difference in the air. Narcissists are not actually looking for a deep, meaningful connection. They are not looking for a relationship built on mutual respect. They are looking for total dominance. They are always on the hunt for people whose emotions they can influence, whose attention they can capture, and whose self-worth they can actively shape. Their own sense of importance depends heavily on validation from the outside world. They require reactions from other people in order to maintain their inflated self-image. Without those steady reactions, they begin to feel an internal sense of emptiness. When you were uncertain, they felt powerful. When you doubted your own perspective, they felt important. When you constantly looked to them for reassurance, they felt superior. Your confusion became their greatest advantage. Your insecurity became their primary source of strength. Your constant willingness to explain yourself gave them endless opportunities to manipulate the conversation. This is why so many relationships involving a narcissist feel so profoundly exhausting. The connection is rarely built on genuine love. Instead, it is often built on control, validation, and a sense of dependency. But everything changes when you begin standing firmly in your own truth. The moment you stop chasing their approval and start listening to your own inner voice, you no longer fit the role they assign to you. This creates a sense of panic. Pay close attention to how they act right after this shift happens. It may not be visible on the surface, but internally the narcissist begins to feel their carefully constructed identity cracking. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer easily influenced. You are no longer afraid of their anger, their silence, or their disapproval. And that is the exact moment they reach for their most dangerous tool. Many experts have warned about this specific tactic because of how destructive it can be. It is essentially projection taken to an extreme level. When narcissists feel their control slipping away, they often stop relying on the more obvious forms of manipulation. They move beyond simple gaslighting and direct blame. Instead, they launch a much deeper attack that is aimed directly at your sense of self. They begin projecting everything they cannot accept about themselves onto you. Suddenly, they accuse you of being the one who is manipulative. They call you selfish. They label you as cold. They describe you as cruel, unstable, difficult, arrogant, or unreasonable. The strange thing is that these accusations often have very little to do with who you really are. They are simply describing their own inner world. They are taking their own traits and placing them onto you. This stage becomes especially dangerous because it is so subtle. It does not always arrive through open hostility. Sometimes it arrives disguised as genuine concern. Sometimes it arrives disguised as deep sadness. Sometimes it arrives disguised as vulnerability. They may tell you that they are worried about your well-being. They may say that you have changed too much. They may insist that you are no longer the person they used to know. They may even suggest that your journey toward healing has somehow damaged you. They might imply that your time in therapy has actually made you worse. They might claim that setting boundaries has made you selfish. They might argue that your newfound self-respect has made you arrogant. The goal behind these statements is simple. They want you to doubt your own growth. They want you to question your progress. They want you to abandon the healthier version of yourself and return to the version they could easily control. This attack targets something very important. It targets your entire journey toward becoming your authentic self. As people heal, they gradually stop living according to the expectations of other people. They become more connected to their own personal values. They stop allowing fear, guilt, and manipulation to dictate their choices. For a narcissist, this transformation feels deeply threatening. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your confidence highlights their insecurity. Your independence reminds them of the control they have lost. Instead of confronting those feelings honestly, they attempt to pull you back into a state of uncertainty. They may suddenly bring up old memories from the past. They may remind you of past mistakes you have already moved past. They may focus on specific moments when you felt weak or vulnerable. They may rewrite history entirely to suit their needs. They may claim that they were always supportive of you. They may insist they only ever wanted the best for you. They may even offer apologies that sound convincing at first glance. But there is an important difference between true accountability and manipulation. Real accountability accepts responsibility without any conditions attached. Manipulation, on the other hand, offers just enough regret to reopen the door to your life. Many narcissists become surprisingly kind during this stage of the process. They may appear deeply reflective. They may seem to have reached a point of self-awareness. They may present themselves as having changed for the better. But very often, this is not genuine growth. It is bait. If you are finding this helpful so far, make sure you take a second to process what this means for your life. They are testing to see if you still doubt yourself enough to come back to them. They are testing to see if your boundaries are actually real. They are testing to see if they can still influence your emotions. If you begin defending yourself again, they feel encouraged. If you begin explaining yourself again, they feel empowered. If you become emotionally reactive again, they feel that their control is returning. That is why this final trick can be so incredibly effective. It targets your emotions instead of your logic. You may start feeling guilty. You may feel responsible for their pain. You may wonder if you really have changed for the worse, as they claim. You may question decisions that once felt perfectly clear to you. You may even find yourself missing a version of the relationship that never truly existed in the first place. This sense of confusion is exactly what they want. However, awareness is what ultimately protects you. Growth often appears threatening to people who benefited from your self-doubt. It is important to remember that healing does not make you heartless. It simply makes you clear. Boundaries do not make you a cruel person. They make you a healthy one. Self-respect does not make you selfish. It makes you a balanced individual. The moment you recognize projection for exactly what it is, it begins to lose its power over you. When you understand that their accusations are merely reflections of their own internal struggles, you stop absorbing them as if they were the truth. When you stop accepting responsibility for emotions that do not belong to you, the manipulation begins to lose its grip. When you stop defending yourself against their false accusations, the cycle finally begins to break. You are moving toward a space of your own, where their influence no longer dictates your reality. This is the path to freedom. And by recognizing these patterns, you are ensuring that your healing remains intact and your future remains your own. Narcissists rely heavily on confusion because clarity is their greatest weakness. They depend on emotional reactions from you, which means that maintaining your calmness actually weakens their influence. They thrive on endless arguments. So, refusing to engage in that cycle removes the fuel they need to keep going. This is exactly why the narcissist's final move often feels so dramatic to you. It is not a sign of strength on their part. It is a sign of pure desperation. They are fighting a losing battle to preserve an identity that was built entirely on control. They are fighting to avoid having to look at their own reflection and acknowledge the truth. Your calmness feels threatening to them simply because it cannot be manipulated. Your silence feels dangerous to them because it cannot be controlled. Your confidence feels like a threat because it no longer depends on their approval. None of this growth makes you cruel. It is just clear evidence that you have outgrown the specific role they once needed you to play. And once you truly understand that, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to convince them of your worth. You stop trying to prove that your intentions are good. You stop trying to gain understanding from someone who actually benefits from misunderstanding you. You stop explaining your personal growth to someone who is terrified of it. You stop sacrificing your inner peace just to maintain a connection that was built on control. Instead, you choose something different. You choose clarity. You choose self-respect. You choose peace. And that one choice changes everything. The truth is that real strength does not come from controlling other people. Real strength comes from deeply understanding yourself. It comes from integrating every part of who you are into a whole. It comes from standing firmly in your own truth, even when other people try to distort it. When you continue to move forward without getting sucked into the narcissist's final manipulations, you complete a cycle that they simply cannot follow. They might leave, they might return later, or they might try a completely different set of tactics. They will likely look for new ways to trigger your old emotions. But once you clearly see the pattern for what it is, it never has the same power over you again. You stop reacting out of fear. You stop reacting out of guilt. You stop reacting out of confusion. You start responding from a place of awareness. Awareness changes everything because it allows you to recognize manipulation before it ever reaches your heart. Keep this close to your mind whenever they try to reach out. Awareness allows you to see projection for what it is before you mistakenly accept it as the truth. Awareness allows you to stay grounded in reality, even when someone else is working hard to distort it. That is the exact moment their control over you truly ends. It does not end when they finally leave. It does not end when they apologize, and it certainly does not end when they finally understand you. Their control ends when you stop needing them to define who you are. And once that happens, their final move loses its power completely. You become stronger than the fear they once used against you. You become stronger than the guilt they once placed upon your shoulders. You become stronger than the confusion they once created in your mind. Most importantly, you become free. And freedom is the one thing a narcissist can never control. Boundaries are not the same thing as rejection, and having confidence is not the same thing as arrogance. When this kind of pressure no longer works on you, they will move to their next strategy. They begin talking about the past in a way that sounds incredibly emotional, sincere, and deeply personal. They start bringing up old memories. They remind you of experiences you once shared together. They talk about moments that felt genuinely meaningful at the time. They will tell you that they miss the way things used to be. They say you smiled more back then. They claim that life felt much easier before you started focusing on yourself. They suggest that everything was better before you decided to prioritize your own needs. At first, this can sound very touching. It can sound like genuine, heartfelt reflection. It can even sound like love. But beneath the surface, something very different is almost always happening. They are not actually longing for the real you. They are longing for the version of you that was much easier for them to influence. They miss the version of you that rarely questioned them. They miss the version of you that constantly gave without ever asking for anything in return. They miss the version of you that explained yourself endlessly while they offered very little understanding in return. They miss the version of you that ignored your own needs just to keep the peace. Their goal is very simple. They want your attention focused on the past instead of on your future. They want you to spend your time comparing your current self to the person you used to be before you developed stronger boundaries. They want you to wonder whether your growth has somehow made you colder. They want you to question the progress you worked so hard to achieve. And if you are not careful, this approach can be surprisingly effective. You might start feeling nostalgic. You might find yourself remembering only the good moments. You might find yourself longing for a time that seems much simpler in your memory than it actually was in reality. You might confuse silence with peace. You might mistake self-sacrifice for love. You might even begin missing the person you used to be before you understood what was happening. That is where the real danger exists. The past becomes a trap when it is edited to look better than it actually was. Painful experiences tend to disappear from memory. Unhealthy patterns become blurred. What remains is a polished version of events that encourages you to return to something that was never truly healthy to begin with. But the most unsettling part of this entire process arrives when this nostalgia strategy fails. When criticism no longer affects you and nostalgia no longer pulls you backward, they change their tactics once again. Suddenly they appear vulnerable. Suddenly they seem overwhelmed. Suddenly they look exhausted, defeated, confused, or emotionally broken. And the timing of this is rarely accidental. The moment you finally begin standing strong is often the exact moment they appear to need you the most. They understand your heart well. They understand what makes you care. They understand exactly what creates feelings of responsibility inside of you. They understand how deeply you value helping others. They understand your compassion, and they know exactly how to use it against you. Without warning, there is a crisis. Something has gone wrong. A sudden problem appears. There might be emotional distress. There might be financial trouble. There might be family conflict. There might be loneliness, fear, uncertainty, or personal chaos. The details change, but the pattern stays exactly the same. The stronger you become, the more urgent their situation suddenly seems. This is one of the most powerful forms of manipulation because it targets your best qualities. It targets your empathy. It targets your kindness. It targets your natural desire to support people who are struggling. They want you to believe that protecting yourself means abandoning them. They want you to feel guilty for putting your own well-being first. They want you to believe that maintaining boundaries is somehow selfish. As a result, they create a situation where you feel trapped between two choices. Either continue your growth or rescue them from their discomfort. Many people do not realize how often this pattern repeats itself. Sometimes the very problems they need help with are problems they helped create themselves. They make destructive choices. They ignore their own responsibilities. They create unnecessary chaos. They avoid accountability at all costs. Then when the consequences finally arrive, they turn toward you. They ask for support. They ask for understanding. They ask for your patience. They ask for a sacrifice. And while it may appear that they simply need help, there is often something much deeper happening underneath. What they truly want is reassurance. They want reassurance that they still matter more than your boundaries do. They want reassurance that they still have access to your time, your energy, your attention, and your emotional resources. Most importantly, they want proof. They want proof that your limits are not actually real. That is why they ask for things you clearly said you would no longer do. They request favors that cross the boundaries you established. They push for closeness after you asked for distance. They seek access after you created space. The requests are usually presented very carefully. They describe them as small, temporary, harmless, or reasonable. They tell you it is only this one time. They insist that the situation is different. They explain that nobody else understands them like you do. They suggest that helping them now would mean everything. These words are not random. Every exception you make weakens your boundaries. Every compromise you agree to opens the door wider. Every emotional appeal creates another opportunity for them to regain control. This is why the situation is rarely about the actual request they are making. It is about testing whether they can still influence your decisions. If you give in, the old cycle begins all over again. The boundaries become less clear. The guilt becomes stronger. The confusion slowly returns. The confidence you spent months or years building starts to fade away. The cost of this is larger than most people realize. You do not simply lose time. You do not simply lose energy. You begin losing trust in your own judgment. You teach yourself that your needs are less important than someone else's demands. You teach yourself that your boundaries are negotiable. You teach yourself that emotional pressure deserves more respect than your own well-being. That is why this stage is so dangerous. It rarely looks like manipulation. It looks like kindness. It looks like compassion. It looks like helping someone who appears to be suffering. But there is a critical difference between compassion and self-abandonment. Compassion allows you to care for others without losing yourself. Self-abandonment, however, requires you to sacrifice your own peace, your own truth, and your own growth to satisfy someone else's need for control. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and remember that your journey toward freedom is the single most important thing you are building today. Protect your progress, hold your ground, and never give away the power you worked so hard to reclaim.